Hi, kids. Welcome to another episode of Bible Stories with Your Mom. Today, we are picking up where we left off on chapter 17, the Crucifixion of Jesus. We are at the bottom of page 240, ready for Thursday. So, Thursday is Passover and teaching in the upper room. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, Jesus' disciples asked if he wanted them to make preparations for Passover. He told them to go to Jerusalem and find a man carrying a jar of water. They were to follow him and say to the owner of the house, "The teacher asks, 'Do you have a guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?' He will show you a large upper room. Make the preparations there." The disciples went into the city and found everything exactly as Jesus had told them. That evening, Jesus and his disciples went to the upper room and reclined at a table to eat the Passover meal. But before they had eaten anything, the disciples began debating about who was the greatest among them. Jesus intervened, saying, "The kings of this world rule over their subjects, but I want my followers to be different. Instead, the greatest should take the lowest position. I have set an example for you to follow. One day, you will rule in my kingdom, but for now I want you to humbly serve others." Jesus then assumed the role of a servant. Removing his outer robe and wrapping himself in a towel, he began washing their feet. When he came to Simon Peter, Peter protested, "I will never let you wash my feet." Jesus said, "Unless I wash your feet, you cannot be my disciple." Peter replied, "Then wash my entire body." Jesus said, "That is not necessary. A person who is bathed is clean all over. Because you are my disciples, you are clean, but not all of you." Jesus said this because he knew Judas was planning to betray him. While they were eating, Jesus said, "Listen, one of you is going to betray me." The disciples were distressed and they said, "It can't possibly be me, can it, Lord?" Jesus replied, "It is the one who has eaten this food with me. As I have predicted, the Son of Man will be betrayed, but it would have been better for my betrayer if he had never been born." Judas said, "Surely it isn't me, teacher." Jesus answered, "Yes, it is you." Judas took some bread, and at that moment Satan entered into him. Jesus said, "What do you plan to do, Judas? Do quickly." Or no, he said, "What you plan to do, Judas, do quickly." Since Judas was in charge of their money, the disciples thought Jesus was telling him to buy food for the meal or something for the poor. Judas immediately went out into the darkness of the night. Then Jesus spoke to the remaining disciples. "My beloved children, I will only be with you a little longer. You will look for me, but you will not find me, and you cannot come to where I am going. I am giving you a new commandment. As I have loved you, so you should love one another. By loving one another, you will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Peter asked, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Peter, you can't come with me now, but you will follow me later." He warned Peter and all the disciples that they would abandon him, but he promised that after he had risen from the dead, he would meet them in Galilee. Peter protested and claimed that even if everyone else abandoned Jesus, he would never leave him. Jesus said that before the rooster crowed, Peter would deny him 3 times. Peter insisted, "Even if it means I have to die, I will never disown you." All the other disciples said the same thing. After warning their loyalty would be severely tested, Jesus resumed the Passover meal. He gave thanks for the bread and broke it. Giving a piece to each of them, he said, "This bread is my body. Eat it in remembrance of me." He then took a cup of wine, and after giving thanks, he said, "This is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for many. Drink it in remembrance of me. Whenever you do this, you proclaim the Lord's death until he returns." That's called communion now, FYI. It was obvious to Jesus that his disciples were upset because he said he was going to leave them. He said, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and also trust in me." He promised he was leaving to prepare a place for them and that they would one day be with him. When they complained they didn't know the way to where he was going, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." Jesus promised that in his absence, they would have a new relationship with him. He would send the Holy Spirit, who works as an advocate, counselor, helper, and comforter, to be with them forever. The Spirit would guide them into truth, convict the world of its sin and need for righteousness, and bring glory to Christ. Using the imagery of a grapevine, Jesus told his disciples that they must remain intimately connected to him to be fruitful or productive. He warned that they would experience the same kind of hostility and persecution that he had faced. The Spirit would help them testify to the world. After telling his disciples about all these things, Jesus prayed. He asked the Father to glorify his Son, to protect the disciples, and to help all believers to become one, even as Jesus and his Father are one. Jesus and his disciples sang a hymn, then walked across the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives. The arrest. Once they were in the olive grove called here I'm going to mess it up, and this is serious stuff here. Gethsemane. Jesus said to his disciples, "Wait here while I pray." He left all of them except Peter, James, and John, whom he took with him for a short distance before he was overcome with grief. He said to them, "My spirit is crushed to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch." Jesus went a little further, and then, falling to the ground, he cried out, "Abba, Father, please take this cup of suffering from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Jesus prayed so intently, his sweat was like great drops of blood falling to the ground. When he returned to the disciples, he found them sound asleep. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me for just 1 hour? Keep watch and pray that you will not be trapped by temptation. Your spirit may be willing, but your flesh is weak." Jesus left them again to pray. As before, when he came back, they were sleeping. They were so embarrassed they didn't know what to say. The same thing happened when he went to pray a third time and returned. Then he shouted, "Are you still sleeping? Look, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. My betrayer is here." Before Jesus finished speaking, Judas burst into the olive grove with an armed group of soldiers. Judas had told them that he would identify Jesus with a kiss. So he went directly to Jesus and said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, and kissed him. Jesus said, "Friend, do what you have planned." As the soldiers seized Jesus, Peter drew a sword and swung at the servant of the high priest. He partially missed and severed the man's ear. Jesus intervened. "Put away your sword, Peter. Will I not drink the cup of suffering and death the Father has given to me?" He touched the man's ear and healed him. The soldiers and the Jewish officials grabbed Jesus and tied him up. Jesus said, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with weapons? I have taught every day in the temple, and yet you did not arrest me. But now Scripture is fulfilled." Jesus' disciples fled, and one of them, who was wearing only his outer robe, ran away naked when the soldiers attempted to grab him. Jewish interrogation and trial. It was the middle of the night when Jesus was taken to the house of Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. Annas asked Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have taught publicly," Jesus replied. "I have taught either in the synagogues or the temples, and I have not done anything in secret. Why question me, all those who heard my teaching?" Or he said, "Ask those who heard my teaching. They know what I said." One of the officials punched Jesus in the face. "Is this any way to answer Annas?" he demanded. Jesus replied, "If I said something wrong, then what was it? But if I spoke the truth, why did you hit me?" After briefly interrogating Jesus, they took him to Caiaphas, who had assembled some members of the Sanhedrin, who was the supreme religious council, even though it was night. They were determined to find evidence to condemn Jesus. They brought in false witnesses, but the charges were so inconsistent they couldn't find enough evidence to convict Jesus. They finally found 2 witnesses who said Jesus claimed he was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Caiaphas asked Jesus if he intended to respond to the charges, but Jesus didn't say a word. Frustrated, the high priest said, "You are under oath. Confess to us if you are Christ, the Son of God." "I am," Jesus said. "In the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the mighty God and coming on the clouds of heaven. In anger and shock, the high priest tore his clothes and said, "We don't need any more witnesses. You have heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" All of those present said, "Guilty, and he should be put to death." Some of them spit in Jesus' face. They blindfolded him and hit him with their fists. They mocked him, saying, "Prophesy, tell us who hit you." They turned him over to the guards, who also beat him. Peter and another disciple who knew the high priest had followed Jesus to the house. When the other disciple was granted permission for them to enter the courtyard, a girl at the entrance asked Peter, "Aren't you one of Jesus' disciples?" Peter replied, "I am not." Because it was cold, the guards had started a small fire in the middle of the courtyard. Peter sat down with them, but a servant girl saw him by the firelight and said, "You are one of Jesus' followers. You were with him in Galilee." Peter emphatically denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. About an hour later, another person near Peter said, "By your accent, I know you are a Galilean. You must be one of his followers." Peter said, "I swear I am not. If I am, let me be cursed." Immediately a rooster crowed, and he remembered Jesus' warning, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he did. At dawn, Jesus was brought before the entire Sanhedrin. "If you are Christ, then tell us," they demanded. Jesus answered, "Even if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. From now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." They asked, "Are you claiming then that you are the Son of God?" Jesus said, "I am." They said, "That's enough evidence. He has testified against himself." When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was so distressed that he returned the 30 silver coins to the religious leaders. "I have sinned," he said, "because I have betrayed an innocent man." "We don't care," they said. "That's your problem, not ours." Judas threw down the money in the temple and soon after committed suicide. Because the money was a bribe for murder, the priest decided to use it to buy a field to use as a cemetery for foreigners. This was known as the Field of Blood, and its purchase fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah and Zechariah that the money paid to betray the Messiah would be used to purchase a potter's field. Now we'll talk about the Roman interrogation and trial. The Sanhedrin turned Jesus over to Pilate, the Roman military administrator of the province of Palestine. Ironically, the Jewish religious leaders stood outside Pilate's headquarters because they did not want to ceremonially contaminate themselves. Pilate had to come out to meet them. Pilate asked, "What are the charges against this man?" The leaders said Jesus was guilty of subversion against Rome and that he claimed he was a king. Pilate told them to try Jesus according to Jewish law. They protested, "We don't have the authority to execute anyone." Pilate went back inside the palace and had Jesus brought in for questioning. "Are you the King of Jews?" he asked. "Did someone else tell you I was a king, or is that what you think?" replied Jesus. Pilate said, "I'm not Jewish. Look, your own people brought you here. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not an empire of this world. If it were, my subjects would defend me. My kingdom is different from the empires of the world." "Then you are a king," said Pilate. "You are right. I am a king. I was born to witness to the world about truth." "What is truth?" Pilate mused. Then he went out to the Jews and said, "There is no basis for your charges against this man." The religious leaders would not be deterred. They insisted Jesus was a threat to all of Judea and Galilee. Pilate went back to Jesus and told him what the chief priests had said, but to his amazement, Jesus refused to defend himself. Pilate found out Jesus was from Galilee, which was under jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, a surrogate ruler under the Romans. So he sent Jesus to Herod for questioning. Herod was delighted to see Jesus. He had heard so much about him. He had hoped Jesus would perform some entertaining miracle, and he asked Jesus question after question. Jesus didn't say a word, even though the religious leaders were there hurling all sorts of accusations. Herod and his soldiers started mocking Jesus. They put a royal robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. Herod and Pilate had been enemies, but that day they became friends. Pilate told the Jews that both he and Herod had questioned Jesus, and neither of them had found evidence of a threat to Rome. He realized that the chief priests had accused Jesus because of envy and not because he had violated Roman law. It was customary for the Romans to release a prisoner at the feast of Passover, so Pilate offered to release one of two men, either Barabbas, I'm not going to say that right, Barabbas, who was a notorious criminal, or Jesus, who claimed he was Israel's Messiah. While Pilate was waiting for an answer, he received an urgent message from his wife. I had a frightening dream about Jesus. Don't condemn him. He is innocent. But the Jewish leaders incited the crowd and persuaded them to insist that Pilate release Barabbas, even though Barabbas had been arrested for insurrection and murder. Pilate ordered Jesus flogged. Before whipping him, the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and shoved it onto his head. They put a purple robe on him. They mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and gave him a crude reed scepter, then beat him on the head with it. Then Pilate went out to the Jews and made it clear that he was certain Jesus was an innocent man. He even had Jesus brought out with the crown of thorns and purple robe and said, "Look, here is the man." When the priests and temple guards saw Jesus, they began shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said, "You crucify him. He is not guilty." But the leaders were adamant. "By our law, he ought to be executed because he claimed to be the Son of God," they said. This frightened Pilate, and he had Jesus taken back into his headquarters. "Where are you from?" Jesus didn't answer. Pilate said, "Why don't you respond? Don't you realize I have the authority to set you free or crucify you?" Jesus replied, "You don't have any power at all in this matter, except the power that has been given to you from above. Those who turned me over to you are the guilty ones." Pilate tried again to release Jesus, but the Jews shouted, "If you let this man go, you are not loyal to Caesar. Anyone who claims he is a king. Anyone who claims he is a king is a rebel." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus outside to the judgment seat and sat down. "Here is your king," Pilate said, but the Jews screamed, "Take him away, crucify him." Pilate asked, "Do you want me to crucify your king?" The people cried out, "Let his blood be on us and our children." "We have no king but Caesar," the priests answered. Pilate symbolically washed his hands, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." Then, to satisfy the leaders and the hostile crowd, Pilate ordered Jesus flogged and taken away for execution. So now we're going to talk about the crucifixion. The first 3 hours. Before crucifying Jesus, the soldiers tortured him. They put a staff in his right hand, and mockingly bowing down to him, they said, "Hail, King of Jews." They spit on him and beat him again and again with the staff. Then they took away the robe and put Jesus' clothes on him. Jesus initially was forced to carry his own cross, but eventually the soldiers saw a man named Simon from Cyrene and forced him to carry it. On the way to the place of execution, a large group of people followed Jesus, including women who grieved. Jesus called out to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep instead for yourselves and for your children. Blessed are those women who have never given birth to children or nursed infants. People will soon beg for death because of the terrible suffering they will be forced to endure." Jesus and 2 other criminals were taken to the place of the skull, which is Golgotha in Aramaic. Around 9 in the morning, the soldiers crucified him between the 2 thieves. After nailing him to the cross, the soldiers divided his clothes into 4 parts. Instead of tearing his outer robe, they gambled for it by throwing dice. Pilate ordered a sign placed on the cross that said, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The inscription was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. When the chief priests read it, they objected, saying, "Do not write King of Jews on there. Write that he claimed that he was the King of the Jews." Their protest fell on deaf ears. Pilate said, "What I have written, I have written." Some of the people walking by mocked Jesus, saying, "You, who claimed you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." The leaders joined the people in mocking Jesus. They said, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. We will believe that he's Christ and the Son of God if he can come down from the cross." One of the crucified thieves shouted, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and save us." The other thief, though, scolded him, "Don't you fear God? We deserve to die. We are guilty, but not this man. He isn't a criminal." He said to Jesus, "Don't forget me when you enter into your kingdom." Jesus answered, "You can be certain that today you will be with me in paradise." Several women were standing near the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and John, the disciple he loved, standing next to her, he said, "My dear woman, this man is now your son." To the beloved disciple, he said, "This dear woman is now your mother." From that time on, Jesus took care of Mary. No, from that time on, John took care of Mary as if she were his own mother. Okay, the last 3 hours. From noon to 3, the entire area was shrouded in darkness. Then Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some didn't understand and thought he was calling for Elijah. Jesus said, "I am thirsty." One of the onlookers tried to give him a drink with a sponge on a pole. Then Jesus prayed, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And he cried out, "It is finished." With those words, Jesus bowed his head and died. That instant, the curtain in the temple ripped from top to bottom. The earth shook, breaking open tombs, and people were raised to life. After Jesus' resurrection, many of them appeared in Jerusalem. When the commander of the soldiers who had crucified Jesus saw him die, he said, "He surely was the Son of God and an innocent man." 3 of the women who had watched the crucifixion were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of James and John. That is it for this chapter. I'm going to wipe my tears and cry a little bit, and see you next time.